I'd like to start off this voice log with a bit of an anecdote where about half a year ago, I stopped studying Russian because I started studying for the CISSP. I was more broadly studying for IT Network Plus and Security Plus, but those are kind of, lower level certifications. I wanted to go for the big fish first. So my ultimate goal was to make my first technical certification in the cybersecurity world with the CISSP. And I don't know how to categorize, oh, this is a mid-level cert, this is an entry-level cert, because different things are expected for different kinds of roles, and I want to be more on the blue team defense sort of thing. I need certainty in my life. I'm a person that does well with a harsh but consistent environment. And if you know your biology, and especially if you know your evolutionary psychology, you might be able to understand that reference and how well that does with my biospirit, you could even say. But I am using a bit esoteric of terms here to move back towards more practical matters. I spent about a half year studying for the CISSP, a management-like certification where you have to know a whole lot. Well, you have to know a little bit about a whole lot when it comes to auditing different laws that are involved. Of course, the different kinds of attacks, different kinds of vulnerabilities, a whole lot about networking, and even a fair amount about social engineering as well. And then even, physical security. How should we have physical place set up so that it will deter intruders from coming onto our property? What are the risks for hurricanes, and how would we set up backups? Do we need an alternate site that could run if our main site goes down? Where should we have that placed and all this? Yeah. There's just a huge amount of considerations going to the CISSP. So in order to prepare for that, I stopped studying Russian. I also stopped studying sign language around the same time because I figured, okay, these languages that I'm trying to keep up with, and I've been studying Russian for like 4 years. Been studying sign language for about 3, I guess. Yeah, 3 at this point. And it's American Sign Language, by the way. I stopped with those languages because it was just extremely overwhelming. I wanted to be extremely focused. I've recently passed my CISSP, and with that, I was like, okay, so I do plan on continuing studying different things within cyber, but I want to revive these languages. So it's been about half a year. How much has slipped from my mind? When going back to Russian, especially because you're using a completely different alphabet, it's really intimidating. The first couple of hours I was back into it, I'm like, I just can't do this. This is just too much. I've been away for too long. It's terrible. But actually putting my nose to the grindstone, to use that disgusting term, there was a lot that gradually came back to me, especially because there's lots of function words and common things that you encounter. It's hard to translate directly, but when you recognize the patterns, it makes sense. Being around that again, it's like, yeah, I do have an understanding for this, and I don't have to attach a dictionary definition to absolutely every last thing in the same way that I would have to if I were studying flashcards to go, oh, well, what is the translation for this or that? It's like, no, I get what you're talking about. Let's move on and let's actually just go through more content. And so that's influenced my approach to learning in general, getting exposure to things that are meaningful instead of trying to drill down and repeat boring crap that you don't learn from. Here's a huge thing, especially from a pedagogical perspective, a way of how do you learn things. If something that you're introduced to does not stick, sometimes it's okay to review once or twice. But if you're reviewing something again and again, and that shit ain't sticking to the wall, then the problem is with the way that you are studying. It's not that you just need to study it more times and it's going to stick. Yeah, maybe it could. Maybe that would work, but that's not effective. That's not efficient. That's stupid. So the thing that is effective and is useful and has helped me enjoy studying Russian as well as sign language more is just getting more content. So instead of trying to drill down, oh, this is the sign for honest, or this is the sign for religion, or just single vocabulary words without any context on their own that are just completely freaking useless, or this is the sign for cut, which is also a stupid thing because there's actually like 3 different signs for cut depending upon what it is that you are talking about. Like I could be cutting carrots, or I could get an injury, that's a cut, or I could be be cutting someone's hair. Each of those signs is a different hand motion that you're going to use. And I don't have video for this, so that doesn't matter. But the thing is, context changes vocabulary in sign language. That's another thing. What is appropriate for a certain context will change depending upon that context, obviously. So the way that you learn things is you have more exposure to more contexts, and you don't have any context with something like flashcards. That carries over into studying for things like cybersecurity, because when you're studying from a textbook, you don't have context. It is like studying from flashcards. It's like reading a dictionary and trying to learn a language by memorizing the definitions of various words from a dictionary. That is not how you learn. So a huge thing that I'm focused on when it comes to continuing my cybersecurity skills is not so much reading textbooks and trying to memorize the textbooks or whatever. It's textbooks are one more aspect of exposure. Yes, I can get more information from like seeing, oh, here's an example of how this attack happened in the past. So there's a textbook that I've currently put down because it's not useful. It is a reference book, but I'm not learning things from it. It's fine for references of here's how you do an art poisoning attack, and it goes through the different details of how you'd execute this from using Kali Linux. That's wonderful. Again, it's fine to have exposure to things, but this is not a learning path of here's where I am, here's how I go forward, here are the steps to develop towards something meaningful. So I need that structure, and the big thing that I'm looking at now is joining an online course in order to have that structure. Before I go into the next part of this longer speech, the takeaway from this introduction is not to get discouraged if you've been away from something. If you have put in the effort, if you have done the time and given an honest effort, if you've put your best foot forward towards something like I had with studying Russian, like I had with studying sign language, even if you're away from something, yes, you did not develop your skills during that time you were away. Yes, you changed tracks to do something else. It is not the case that all hope is lost. Oh, you made a mistake. You ended up chasing down something else, which means that you had to give up this. No, that is not the case. You are not useless. You are not worthless. Those skills do exist, even if you're rusty with them. But the thing is, there is a bit of a hump to get over before you get back into it. And that's something where a lot of people get really discouraged, and it's important to have social approval in order to get over that hump, because we experience this resistance towards something that we know is going to be a struggle, because it's a way of reevaluating, is it worth it? And whether or not something is worth it is very dependent upon the reward or punishment associated with it. And a huge aspect of that is, will other people give a damn? There's a lot of guru hippy-dippy bullshit about, oh, you need to feel in your heart that you really want to have this passion for... No, you really have to look at practical terms. One thing that I love doing is video production. I like making YouTube videos, especially about video games. That's a hugely saturated market. I'm not going to make money from that. I'm not going to become famous and be a YouTuber full time and all this. So I understand that I have to pursue other things, to be practical. Also, I'm not expressing some great message to enhance humanity by making YouTube videos about video games, which is why I have a different sense of fulfillment from my writing. The things that I write, the stories that I have, and that conveys, a sense of meaningfulness that is not fulfilled from, just doing video games, where I do have a strong sense of selfish fulfillment, vainglory from, hey, I really enjoy this video game. I like sharing that. Even then, there's the social aspect of, I like sharing this to show something funny happening. So the external locus of control is something that if someone doesn't recognize it's there, then they are either dishonest or they're ignorant of it. I don't think that there is any true such thing as like being internally motivated. No, that's layer upon layer of deception. The other person is going to be unaware of what outside factors are actually motivating them, which makes them subject to manipulation. Because if they think that they're in control, but they're actually chasing after something that's outside of themselves, then it's easier to manipulate them because they just think that it's themselves that's responsible. When they might think, oh, I really want to go to this hamburger place, and I just made that choice on my own, but they didn't realize like, oh, I was listening to the radio and this hamburger place was mentioned like 15 times, so that's why it's in the back of my mind. People don't think about that, and you can't be aware of the unconscious subconscious. That's another thing. But see, this is just my inherent understanding of psychology just coming out when I'm able to just express myself on these things. But in a similar way with, understanding psychology and all of this, it's important to understand the principle that things that you learn, things that stick with you and that actually make an impact on your life, especially like skills that you've dedicated yourself towards, things that you have gotten into like a real flow state with studying, with developing, that there's a part of you that like clings to that. That's part of your identity now. If you spent 4 years studying a language, that's a part of you. And that's not something that you should throw away and be like, oh, well, I can never do anything with this. Another thing that I've studied a whole lot is Japanese, and that's not something that I plan on studying ever again. But that doesn't mean that it was a waste either. It's like, oh, well, how do I justify this? And I'm at the point where if someone's like, well, justify yourself. Well, no one says it that straightforwardly. Justify yourself for wasting part of your life doing something that I don't see the point in. The easy answer is character development, and if you can't respect that, then you can get out of my life. But of course, if you're talking to an employer or something, then you can't say, well, I was working on developing myself. A lot of people would not respect that. And also, if they're looking for a specific skill, then I, as the prospective employee, should be focused upon that skill and say, oh, that's not relevant. Like, oh, so what about this studying Japanese thing? Like, is it relevant to the job? Because that's our relationship here, and in this context, it falls outside of the bounds of acceptable discussion if it's just speculation that has nothing to do with the job and is like, more personal. If this were a personal relationship, then talking about personal pursuits of individual development would be appropriate. Like, I draw a very strong line between personal and professional relationships, and that's because I respect both of them significantly. I don't want to like have that mixing and matching of like, I'm your buddy, but I'm also your boss, so like, I'm your good old pal. There's something of significance that's lost in the professional aspect of it as well as the personal aspect of it. So yeah, there's a sense of recognition that should be there. But I have gone on too long about this. There's no such thing as a wasted effort if you learn anything. Here's the other thing is you as the individual might not recognize how you have grown from something. Like after I'd lived in Japan, I didn't personally feel like I had changed that much at all, but my family absolutely saw how I changed. And my close friends recognized how I had developed a sense of maturity that they themselves did not achieve. And a lot of that is them, not being pushed out of their comfort zone. There's subtle things like this where like day to day you encounter various problems, uncomfortable situations that you overcome in novel ways. And that develops character in a way that's very difficult to show. That's one of those soft skills of being able to adapt and overcome. But this is long enough for an intro. Let's move in to the next topic in the next recording. Thank you.